Hadouken!
What does that even mean?
You don't know what a Hadouken is? Wow.
What is a Hadouken?
وما أدراك ما الهادوكن. Hadouken is remember Street Fighter?
Yeah?
That was Ryu and Ken Hadouken when they did the fireball.
Oh, okay.
See, we're both learning here. Okay. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to this special unscripted episode. It's me, your host Salman Butt again, and we thought we'd mix it up a bit, get a bit of diversity on the podcast. So we got someone all the way from America. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum, Professor Jonathan Brown.
Wa alaikum salam.
This is where we do the fake salam.
I'm diverse. I'm a diversity.
Your tick-boxing exercise, yeah. And what
is diverse about me? That I'm from the U.S. or that I'm my phenotype, racial phenotype.
You're a professor and you're from the U.S.
We all look alike, huh? I do. Nice sound effect.
Yeah.
You really. Do you have like a kind of like an array of? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't know which button to push to get like the crickets fast enough. You must have like a big giant.
It's been baked into my subconscious now. So anytime, like I know that is the old. Oop, that was by accident. What I meant was clearly haven't mastered this enough.
What do you use sneezes for? Like, what would that be useful for in a conversation? Like,
well, it was more.
Someone.
It was more. I loaded it more when the coronavirus pandemic was kind of starting, but now it seems a bit distasteful, seeing as so many people have died. But I'll probably change those. I've had a few context or kind of guest specific ones in the past. So when we have like a qari, I'll test him out with load a few, different reciters and see if he can guess them. And I was thinking about what to do for you, but yeah, I was like cricket sounds. Maybe.
Yeah. Sorry, there's nothing characteristic for me.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we got to talk finally after not being able to meet in the UK when I was there, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Sorry, but I mean, it was.
No, it's just my fault. It wasn't your fault.
Yeah, I was just being nice, but. Yeah, it was good. It was good to speak to you anyway, briefly. But for the viewers, we've been trying to arrange our schedules because Professor Brown's been very desperate to come on the show, come on the podcast, and I just didn't have time, or something along those lines. But inshallah, when the pandemic's over, we have to try and organize something when you're next in town. Speaking of the pandemic, how's lockdown going for you?
It's pretty good. I mean, I've kind of conflicted, I guess. It's sort of like my ideal lifestyle, my ideal. I've dreamt of a time when I wouldn't have to leave the house. I can't wear like regular clothing in the house. The second I come home, I have to change into. Is everything okay, or is like some kind of?
Yeah. You just cut off for a second, but.
I think something's happening in the other room. Like some kind of kid is using a device.
Yeah.
Hang on.
No, if you're Asian, then you could your slipper would reach around corners.
Yeah, I mean,
you could get a spin on it.
The thing is, I don't have. Yeah, look at these. Look what I have. I don't have. Look at this thing. Imagine trying to throw this. This is my Uggs. Look at this. Look at the hole in there. You guys can see.
That's Zuhud, man. MashaAllah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's frozen again. You're frozen again for a second.
Not to leave the house and not to change into regular clothing. So this is kind of nice for me, but I feel obviously it's terrible what's happening outside, and the whole world's in economic ruin. So this is depressing.
SubhanAllah, yeah. I mean, I saw this video from New York, some Muslim. I think it was a funeral parlor or something, and there was bodies everywhere. He was like, poor guy was overrun with I hope it was. I wished it was a fake, wasn't real, but it was really scary stuff. And they're saying, I mean, here over here at least in the UK, they're saying that the most of the deaths are of people from, black and ethnic minority ethnic groups. There kind of research going on as to why that is. A few theories, but what's it like in the US? Is it kind of broadly impacting everyone?
Yeah, well, it's hard to know. I mean, you really feel like you're at the kind of mercy of what the media wants you to know or what is being promoted. Like that thing about the Muslim funeral parlor. I think that guy was actually storing bodies for like a church next door. So it wasn't actually. It wasn't as dramatic as it was made out to be. But on the other hand, I mean, the number of people that I know who've died, like that I know, or I know people I know who know them, right? Either like first or second degree relationships. I mean, it's like a lot of people. I mean, so now the question about who's impacted. I mean, everything I've seen suggests that, minorities are being disproportionately affected by by deaths and kind of severe illness in the case of this pandemic. I don't know why that is, but yeah, it's disturbing.
Yeah, there's a few theories out there, but I don't want to speculate or anything. Have you been coping with the mental health stuff at home? Been playing with the kids, and a lot of people are getting on each other's nerves.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, I feel like I think the homeschooling is hard. I mean, I don't understand. I can't imagine if I had like a real job, I wouldn't be able to. My kids wouldn't be educated right now, right?
Yeah,
so I have the luxury of I've published a lot in my life, thank God. So I kind of this year I was sort of taking it easy a little bit in terms of research. So the last couple of years I was, kind of burning the candle at both ends. And so I kind of have more free time this year. And I know I just teach 2 classes but if I could spend a lot of time, I could do research at night, during the day I can work with my kids. But if I had a regular job, I don't know, my kids would not, they would just have to put them in front of the TV or something.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm really lucky, but I think that's the hard part is homeschooling. Otherwise, it's nice. I mean, my brothers-in-law are here. They live with us now, or they happen to be here during this time, and so they're kind of my kids can play with them, and they have a lot of fun. So it's sort of more.
You're mentioning that you
more like a party.
You were mentioning that you were teaching the kids, showing them some card tricks, and I found this is what I ran upstairs to get.
Oh wow!
Some nice cards.
Oh really? So you make me feel bad.
You
okay,
ready?
Let's see. Yeah.
Oh, it's a bit too
wow.
slippery.
Wow.
So I haven't done it for a while. So these are quite nice cards.
Okay. Yeah. So I've been. To be fair, I've been doing it from a farther distance. So I'll do it like this. I'll do it from like, here to here.
Are you trying to get me to do it and then make a fool of myself?
Like, vertically. I don't have my cards with me. So I've been doing it like this.
Let me try.
Oh,
Alright, let's get that out of the way.
Sound effects used.
It could be a homeschooling project to collect those later on.
So yeah, I've been having some, but I feel like I also need to remember. I've been like, okay, I'm gonna try and learn some trick shuffles, but I also want to memorize Surat al-Hujurat. So those are two. I feel like every time I'm trying to learn with cards, I'm like, I really should be memorizing Surat al-Hujurat.
It's an interesting choice, interesting combination.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I feel kind of bad. Like I don't want to like come out of this whole thing with like some really good card tricks and no Hujurat. That would be bad result.
Yeah, subhanallah. I mean, I've been just going on shopping sprees and stuff. It's really bad. I mean, I was thinking like I bought
You
them
mean
like
online shopping sprees?
yeah. I mean, just when you're sitting when you I've got a nice home office kind of set up here, and I've just been buying loads of like little. I bought a mechanical keyboard, because I type a lot.
What's a mechanical keyboard?
It's you got. Oh, I don't know if I tell you about this. It's like a cult kind of community of people who make custom keyboards. And just listen to this.
So it's like the old kind of typewriter style?
Yeah, well, it's not like as hard as typewriter, but there's loads of like mechanical keyboard switches, and there's different kind of profiles for kind of key travel and resistance. So this one has like a really satisfying click for kind of typing. It's like you're typing on pillows, but yeah, it's silly.
Well, if it's better than this MacBook Pro, the new MacBook Pro ones are terrible. Oh,
Yeah,
they're like the old Apple ones are really good keyboards. And then
yeah.
they moved to these ones, and
I had two. I've got two old Apple keyboards, like the thick one. I've even got the one that's similar to mechanical, but it's not really mechanical, and the kind of streamlined thin one. But unfortunately, they stopped working. So
really?
I spilled some coffee all over it, but it turns out it was all under control.
What's under control? Okay, yeah, it took a while to get.
To be fair, I only heard that joke today. I'm trying it out. Actually, Siri told me it because I was trying to.
You heard that joke from somebody else. That's
No.
not. You mean that traveled between people?
I don't know. It's
comic value to travel between people. That's ridiculous.
This is it's tadlis of Siri. Actually, Siri told me it's because
Actually, you want to know? I'll tell you a joke. I'll tell you the best joke I ever made, which no one ever appreciates, but I think it's the best joke ever made.
Go ahead.
Wait,
let me get ready.
You say that's the worst idea since someone invented a machine that takes sliced bread and reforms it into a whole loaf. Get it? I remember I made that joke.
Are you sure you made that? I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I made that joke in college. No. I was walking down the street with my friends and I made that joke and it was nighttime and I was so happy about it and nobody laughed. And I've made that joke for the last 20 years and really like nobody's laughed.
That is...
But I think it's brilliant, conceptually brilliant joke.
That's marvelous. That's the second best joke I've heard all day.
After the control one. I actually used it the other day, and I can't remember what the situation was, and I think one person laughed.
Yeah. Nice. I've also been, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I'm kind of addicted to this series about Imam Ahmed. Have you seen this?
Oh yeah, I've seen that. No, I started to. I'm not really into these like Arab series. I started to look at the one
really
Omar
bad
bin
and really good at the same time. It's like really melodramatic and everything. So I don't know if that's how kind of Arab sitcoms are. Not sitcom, soaps. But
I'm torn, man. I'm really torn. I love Arabic and I love obviously Islam.
That's why I was watching it, by the way. Gonna disclaimer to practice my Arabic.
But at the same time, like I'm just I don't want to have anything to do with basically almost all the entire Arab world. Just so painful. I just like I don't want to.
But if it's any consolation, it's made by Qatar, I think. So it could be worse.
I mean, that's like one of the few countries I can go to in the Middle East where I feel like some degree of integrity.
And you don't get arrested.
Yeah, that's true. So this, I don't know. It's painful. It's painful to watch these things. It reminds me of a time, earlier in my life when the kind of Arab world and Arab media were all kind of interesting. I mean, yeah, they had their problems, they had their angles, but it wasn't so kind of naked and sort of vicious as it is now. Now it's just the vicious nakedness of these agendas and these sort of anti-Islamic messages. It's just it's painful to watch, and I feel like I'm in purchasing some kind of narcotic when I watch them. So I tend to not I don't watch any like Egyptian stuff. I don't watch any Lebanese stuff. But yeah, like the Omar bin al-Khattab series is really interesting.
Yeah.
That's a couple of years old, I think. My brother-in-law told me about it. I've been watching that. But you know, it's tough, man. In general, I don't have any time. Like, I don't know about you, but this Ramadan, like, I don't know where my time goes. Maybe it goes to doing podcasts. Maybe I should stop accepting podcasts. You know, so
or maybe you've been doing card tricks instead of learning Surah Hujurat.
Yeah, exactly. So you know, where my time goes, man. Last night I made the DoubleTree chocolate chip cookies. I don't know if you know about these, right? Do you know about these? So there's this hotel. It's one of the Hilton chains called DoubleTree.
Oh right, yeah. They have their own cookies.
Whenever you go in, they give you a cookie at the check-in desk, and but people love these things. And so like when this whole home quarantine thing started, they released their recipe.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so I made my wife made them the other day. I made them last night, and I'm not like I actually am a really good cook, but I don't make cookies. Like I've maybe made cookies like once in my life. Like there's some people who just make cookies all the time. Me, I don't make cookies, right? That's like seems to be kind of a joke. But I was really worried because I was like, what happens if I can't even make these cookies? So I was reading the recipe and I was like, this thing, it calls for the same amount of flour, the same amount of chocolate chips as flour. So let's say there's like 2.5 cups of flour. It's like 2.5 cups of chocolate chips. So I was like, this can't be right.
Impressive.
So I didn't put all the chocolate chips in, but they were still pretty good. What's up? ايش بدك؟ اي واحد اي كرة الكرة الكبيرة البيضاء ومش عارف يمكن شوف هناك ولا شوف فوق يمكن في غرفة ماما وبابا. This is my kid is looking for the soccer ball.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, it's pretty cute. So his uncles are big into FIFA, the game, like this some kind of soccer game.
I've heard about it, yeah.
You play like the players. So he like watches with them and gets super into it. He's like cheering, and my kids are like hugging each other, like we scored. But then, so his thing is now he'll do the announcer voice. So this is how I've been waking up the last couple of days. So obviously, I sleep after Fajr because I'm a lazy bum. So I may sleep kind of late, right? So it may be that other people are actually up having fully active days while I'm still in bed. So this is how I've been being woken up the last couple of days. Is my son will come into the room, and I just hear this like, Benzema scores, Benzema goes, Benzema passes to Gerrard. Gerrard's got the ball. Who's Gerrard? Gerrard's playing for this team. What team? This team. Oh, that's a Legends team or something. I'm just like, I wake up and it's my son like kicking the ball around and doing his little announcer routine. He is 7.
Okay, that's good. I think if he's like 15, 16, there's something to worry about. But
no, he's just 7. So so this is a big deal in the house right now.
Alhamdulillah. So I mean, I wanted to talk to you also about some of your. It was funny because the brother who organized this kind of meeting, Mansour, he was like, "Well, we don't want to do it live because, sometimes." You might say something and you might think, wait a second, some people might misunderstand that, misconstrue that, and then it turns into a massive thing. And I was like, I want to explore that a bit. So what are some of the things that you've been saying that's kind of been getting you into trouble with the kind of the Twitter sphere or social media kind of haters?
So you want me to tell you things I've said that have gotten me in trouble? Are you crazy? I'm not going to tell you these things. I mean, like, what kind of idiots are you used to dealing with on this podcast?
I can give you a list.
So,
So I mean, I just had a quick
okay,
check.
so
I mean, I've
hang
been
on.
following your work for a while.
Wait, but
And
hang on. So let's just be clear. So there's like I will readily admit that
mm,
I sometimes do not choose words well. And
mm,
this has been a problem for me since high school. I can't tell you how many times I got called in by like my deans in high school and got busted for saying something. I mean,
mm,
they always said the same thing. They said, "We don't understand you. Other people don't understand what they did wrong, but they stop their behavior. You understand what you did wrong, but then you keep doing it." I was told, I was like, I don't know what to say.
mm.
So the I think genuinely, I don't intend to say some things that are offensive to people.
But do you
But
find that there's people that are just kind of trawling through your stuff, waiting
well,
to
yeah,
kind of
and
catch
that's
something?
another aspect of it, right? Which is
Yeah.
that, if you don't, if we don't have charity for one another,
Mm.
you can't, it's very difficult to deal with other people. And I mean, I posted this on, I think on Twitter or something. The day I was reading, one of the things I've been working on the last couple of weeks or months is reading the whole Nuzhat al-Khawatir of Abdul Hayy al-Hassani, who died, I think, in the 1930s. He's this big scholar from Nadwat al-Ulama.
Oh, okay.
I think he's the father of um, Abul Hassan
Abul
Nadwi,
Hassan.
if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Rahimahullah. Mm.
Somebody can check that out. But so he wrote this,
Somebody's gonna
like,
refute you if that's not accurate.
yeah, go ahead, write a response.
Right.
And
PDF
say Jonathan Brown should cease and desist his Islamic, declamations. He is not qualified.
in Ilmun
So
Nisab.
this is a like 8-volume biographical dictionary of kind of ulama and grandees of India. And so he gives this is his, I think it's his bio of Ahmed Sirhindi, Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, right? Obviously the founder of kind of the Mujaddidi
Mm.
Naqshbandi movement. He died in 1625, if I'm not mistaken, of the Common Era. So there's this one huge scholar, Abdul Hakim As-Si Al-Kuti, from
From
who's
Sialkot.
yeah, he's from Sialkot, which I think nowadays makes like athletic wear, which is great, right? Which is terrific, right?
Yeah.
But
That's where all the good cricket bats are made.
so he says he's talking about people criticizing Ahmed Sirhindi, and he says kad kardan dar sukhan bozorgan ulama
Really?
as ghairi muradishan, what is it? Jahlast va nik natije darad, right? So if you criticizing the words of big ulama, criticizing what they say for what they didn't intend
Mm.
is ignorant and has bad results. Now, obviously, I'm not a big alim, so I'm not saying that
Mm.
this applies to me. But I think the general rule is sound for any communication, which is that if you go around fishing for things people say and then
Yeah.
trying to extract meaning from them that wasn't the meaning of the person, then
It's
this
sort
is
of
really a
done.
waste of time.
It's sort of
It's just a
done.
waste of time.
We're supposed to do the opposite. As you know from Surah Hujurat, you're supposed to have
Yeah, exactly. I need to get to
husnul
that
dhan.
part. So, إنما
But
بعد
you,
الظن isn't
yeah.
that so I think, like, once you get, I mean, it's sort of hard to know in the world today, like in the kind of the different ecosystems of
Mm.
Twitter and social media. Like, you don't even have to be famous to attract critics, right? So you can be
Yeah.
a medium-sized fish in a small pond. So I would probably be a medium-sized fish in a small
Mm.
pond, but even a medium-sized fish in a small pond, apparently there's like people who are willing to spend many hours of their day
Yeah, and that kind
looking
of stuff
through.
is I think Twitter, social media generally is geared towards kind of amplifying that kind of stuff, and showing people more of that kind of stuff and making that stuff go viral, because that's what unfortunately appeals to the kind of the primitive parts of our personality, that they want to see the gossip, they want to see that kind of stuff, so they'll stay on those accounts longer, those posts longer in your time, in your news feed, and that will in turn get it kind of marked with the algorithms as something hot, because the whole economy that these social media sites work on is attention. So the longer something captures your attention, the more it will show it to people, and the more viral it will go, unfortunately. But you could write, you know, the kind of that meme, you know, it's been doing the rounds for maybe a few decades now. You know, some very important kind of piece of information or knowledge, you know, 2 likes, you know, someone's some celebrity breakup, you know, 100,000 likes or whatever. So that's the kind of thing, unfortunately, we're dealing with. And it's interesting you put it with small fish and a medium fish in a small pond as well, because everyone's getting it. I mean, people just kind of it's I think it's something. It's interesting that you mentioned that it's happened in the past on a different scale and different medium. You know, with the I forgot who you mentioned from Nadwatul Ulama, but it's like on steroids now, because you know, it's everyone has a keyboard, not a mechanical one, but everyone has a keyboard, everyone has a smartphone now, and you know, everyone has the ability to broadcast their opinions, and the phases that people would go through in the past in private on only harming those immediately around them. These are now kind of open to many kind of manifold more people, and I think it's personally, I've been thinking it's maybe a sign that the internet, social media, the digital age, cyberspace is actually changing how we changing significantly how we view Islam and how we go about carrying out Islamic things, Islamic fiqh, Islamic theology, discussions, discourse, because there's the kind of address of the pulpit, the khitab of the, you know, giving people iman boosts and encouraging them to do good, and you know, warning them against evil. That has its place, but that's naturally more hyperbolic. That's naturally more you know, emotional and you know, rhetorically charged, and it should be. That has its place, but the actual mechanics of fiqh, the mechanics of fatwa, that has a completely different address. And we've got people who've been riled up with this type of address going to you know, refuting and harming with their pens and their tongues and their keyboards people who are actually carrying out the fiqh, people actually carrying out the research, carrying out the fatwa, such that you get this really kind of strange paradox where people would talk about people who talk about Sharia in this way overshadow people who are actually doing Sharia, people in the fiqh councils, people on the front line, you know, giving, answering people's questions, judging people's disputes and stuff. And this I mean, I don't know, this I feel that, I don't know if I'm being pessimistic, or I think it is actually changing the way Islam is being spoken of on a global scale. You know, when you have I don't want to mention names or mention groups or anything, but you know, pro-Sharia people, in a rhetorical sense, they're very passionately pro-Sharia, but they'll abuse the people actually doing the Sharia, the people actually implementing it, doing the research, doing the, you know, counseling people, people judging people's disputes and so forth. Do you see? I mean, do you see that as well, or am I being too?
Yeah,
pessimistic?
I mean, I think that there's, yeah, definitely, I agree with you. I think that, you know, I think that the kind of online universe amplifies and facilitates, you know, patterns of behavior that have always been there. And I think it creates a, you know, a negativity that can be like, you know, becomes toxic very quickly. And that, you know, that can become like a dominant part of someone's religious experience. And if that's the case, eventually that person's going to burn out and just get sick of that. I mean, who wants to live like that?
I mean, an example of this, just because it might be a bit too theoretical, the example is For example, the articles that you've written about LGBT kind of activism and what Muslims, what you suggest Muslims might think of doing and supporting and alliances and just politics in general. It's really, I mean, I didn't find much objectionable about it personally, but the type of attacks that you were getting, I'm not just saying that because you're here and slagging you off behind your back, but it's this is like a locus of that problem I'm talking about because I mean I sometimes think about imagine if there was social media in the time of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, right? And even the senior companions there, they were upset at the hand that they were dealt, so to speak, in the treaty. They have to turn around, they have to go back, they can't go to they've come to make the pilgrimage, and because of this compromise, this is a political treaty. There's give and take. There's this type of stuff happening. The Prophet ﷺ was there to advise them, and Surah Fatih came down, right, and changing the discourse narrative around that. So that kind of the impact of that was contained, the upset that was felt. But if there was someone with, guess what treaty was just signed? Oh, they're going to send back the Muslims that are fleeing from the persecution of the kuffar, and they're going to do this and going to do that. And imagine how that would just spread like wildfire now, But it was the Prophet ﷺ. This Allah called this the Fatih, despite being, and that's one of the issues, the difference between the theory, the talking about don't compromise on your principles on the Jum'ah pulpit, and actually doing the fatwa, doing the politics, doing the the actual give and take, and the weighing out the different considerations. And that's, we find, because of maybe the pedagogical issue, because how we learn, how we're taught Islam now, we find that those two things to be in conflict, but they shouldn't be. I mean, I get a lot of slack from some people, saying, "Oh, look, this guy, he's pro-democracy, he's asking for us to participate in elections," all that kind of stuff. When look at this, and they bring all of the rhetoric. So, the rhetoric of anti-democracy, it had its, in the last century or so, it had its context, right? The ulama that were talking against that. I mean, you can see they were talking about Western imperialism, for example. They were talking about the kind of an absurd consequence of having pure democracy and mitigated by nothing else, no other value, right? Like the rule of law or anything like that. So obviously they're talking about that kind of thing. But when you're actually juggling the benefits and the harms, when you're doing the fatwa, that same scholar who on the pulpit, he'll be encouraging people in a passionate kind of address. He or she, even, they're going to be making these compromises, and they're not compromises in your in core matters of your deen. And I think the key is separating between the theory and the implementation of that theory. I mean, there's different ways you can discuss this thing. I've heard you discuss it as well, for example, talking about thawabit and mutaghayyirat, talking about just things that are solid, unchanging, and those things that do change. But I think a better way of maybe articulating this for our brothers and sisters is that the theory is one thing. The theory doesn't change, okay? But in terms of when it comes to implementing that theory, there's principles you have to kind of take into consideration, right? Theory is hurrimat alaykum al-mayta, for example, right? Carrion, dead meat is prohibited for you. Now, implementing that on this particular piece of meat here, that's the issue, and that people need to recognize that, because we've got people who think the theory is enough and they just implement it wherever they think it's possible. I don't know, I'm ranting. Does that even make sense?
No, it makes sense. I mean, I think, that's entirely correct. And I think that a lot of this is not even about, okay, first of all, like, a lot of this stuff isn't really fiqhi even in the sense that it's more like political decision making. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you can,
Mm.
you know, there's not a fiqhi answer to, if you have $100 and you're a government, how much do you spend on education versus healthcare, right? So
Yeah.
do I spend $50 in healthcare, $50 in education, or $75 in healthcare and $25 in education? Like, there's not a fiqhi answer to that. That's just a
Mm.
decision. That's a politics in the sense that a community deciding how to distribute resources.
Yeah.
What are, and so I think a lot of the issues of implementation of principles end up really being political questions, and those are subject to disagreement. But
Mm.
those disagreements don't have to be. So things like the kind of LGBT issue. I mean, I think this is really a political question, and this is nobody is debating what is haram and halal. Right? Nobody is debating, what Muslims should teach their children. At least as far as I'm
Mm.
concerned, right? Um, it's really a question of, do you ally with a certain group for certain end or not, right? And no one, I mean, I would never advocate Muslims conceding their principles. I would never say that Muslims should not do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar on these issues. It's just a matter of, this group wants to make sandwiches for poor people, and I also want to make sandwiches for poor people. So do we cooperate on making sandwiches for poor people? Like, what's, but that's really a political question.
I think even I would say, even sorry to cut you off, I would say even the political questions, they still have the same mechanics of you have a theory, you have the values, right? You're saying, okay, I value in education or whatever, and then the actual decision or the treaty you kind of muster up is a concretization of all those different things and how they fall when the kind of dice is thrown, so to speak. I don't think if you even need those disclaimers that I wouldn't what do you say? I wouldn't advocate Muslims don't do amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar. Maybe you might, and at the end of the day, you might have an argument to say, you know, warning against a particular munkar might lead, if it leads to a bigger munkar, then you don't warn against that, or you practice a kind of acting as though you haven't, you're not condoning it, but you're neither condemning it publicly, for example. I think to me it falls under the same thing, but I think the problem is one thing I always remember. Our Sheikh, he said, Sheikh Haytham, he said, I think you met him. He said, if somebody focuses on aqidah so much, not what we would argue is aqidah, but the way it's taught, the science of aqidah, kind of black and white, this is iman, this is kufr. If somebody focuses on aqidah so much that they will go beyond the point where they'll become really bad at politics, right? And I didn't understand this when he said this to us years ago, but over the years I've seen this kind of play out. And similar is our approach to fiqh as well. Many of us, we look at fiqh as, just ibadat, and they're characteristically very restrictive. This is how you pray. This is how you must calculate zakat. This is how you must do this. But the rest of, the majority of fiqh, someone might say, is the opposite. It's, everything's allowed, but here are the things you have to be careful of. And it goes to the qadi or the jurist or whoever, to the mufti, to kind of juggle these things as and when these fatwa come.
I mean, I think one of the reasons that the kind of theology and politics don't go well together, as you were saying, is that a lot of these disagreements, like for example, on LGBT things, have to do with kind of assertions about eventual results, right? So it'll say, okay, if you do this, this will happen, right? If you work with this group, this will become normal, right? If you
Mm.
and that might be correct, right? But that's not something that is really a theological discussion, right? So if you're saying, if you do this, Muslims will think something. Uh, the severity of the disagreement is because your opponents are assuming that you think it's okay to think that thing,
Yeah.
whereas you don't think it's okay to think that thing. You just don't think that it is as likely as your opponents claim that Muslims will end up accepting a certain belief, right? So, or maybe your opponents are right, but you're wrong not because you are wrong theologically or wrong
Yeah.
on some issue of, ma'lum min ad-din badurura in terms of fiqh. You're just wrong because you have sort of calculated a probability incorrectly.
You didn't think the
Which
slope
is,
was that slippery.
yeah, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, someone could say, oh, I was wrong about the slope being slippery.
Mm.
I mean, okay, but I mean, this is really, so now,
But it's
but let's be
fundamentally
reasonable about,
unjust to accuse you of being pro
yeah, I mean,
whatever.
let's be
Yeah.
honest about, like, we can have this disagreement, okay, I think the
Mm.
slope is this angle, you think it's that angle. Okay, so we can either compromise, we can either say that we're going to acknowledge our disagreement and pursue different courses of action. We can sort of disagree, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to,
Mm.
obviously we're still both Muslim, obviously we're still both going to pray together, obviously we still agree on like 99.9% of everything else in our religion, right? So like this is I think one of the problems is that a lot of these political discussions are really about fears about future course of events.
Yeah.
So you're not really debating a current situation, you're debating people's justifiable and justified fears about the future.
Mm. I would put that in the same
Another,
camp as the theory and implementation, because the implement both camps. For let's say, those who are kind of very strict, are opposing your views, and those who are kind of holding your views. Both camps are making arguments based on anticipated consequences. It's not one camp's the Islamic camp and one camp's the non-Islamic camp. They're both making arguments based on, they have the theory, they have the values, the masalih that they're holding important in their minds, but they're saying the way we concretize these things and prioritize one over the other, and kind of include the anticipated consequences is this, and another person's concretization is that. I think when we clarify it this way, we realize that everyone agrees on the main core, the values, the masalih, the sharia, in its essence. It's just, I think going this way is better. I think going that way is better. That's what it boils down to. Really, I don't see a kind of substantive difference of opinion on that.
I mean, I think that's correct. I mean, another thing is that, and this I think kind of gets more into the particulars of the issues that we're discussing, which is a lot of like we are right now, and I mean right now, and I mean like in the last year, and I probably in the coming year to 2 years, at least in the United States, and I think also in the UK, really at an inflection point for which course of action is correct, right? So, in that article that you're referencing, when I advocated, I think it was called Ratio, like rights affirmation. So basically, kind of religious freedom approach, where you say, I'm going to affirm the rights of other groups, provided they affirm my right to hold my religious beliefs and to teach my children and to have my child's education, my moral environment protected, right? That's being decided right now. So when you have things like the kind of gay wedding cake cases in the UK and the US, when you have things like the Birmingham school district issue, Birmingham school issue, right? Or which is, I guess, basically England and throughout England and Wales. Like that kind of stuff is really fundamental. If we end up in a situation where certain things are being taught to our children in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and we do not have a right to opt out of those classes, I would completely change my position. Because that, in that case, Muslims' right to their freedom of conscience and freedom of practice is not being respected, right? So, so the question is now, we're at this point where, are we going to go down a path where, religious communities are going to be allowed to have their own kind of school environment, their own, opt out of certain classes, schools aren't going to be teaching certain things to young children, right? Or are we going to go down a direction where, no, a certain liberal, progressive vision of society is going to be imposed at every level of education, regardless of what parents want? Those two different paths require two totally different approaches by Muslims.
Yeah.
And I'd say by Christians and Jews as well.
I think that's one of the differences between I'm not a legal scholar or anything, but that's the difference that I noticed between the US context of the legalization of gay marriage and the UK context. I think in the US context, the argument was based on lifting impositions, but in the UK it was a matter of adding imposition and enforcing, for example, churches and so forth and registration offices to carry out these types of unions and call them marriages according to XYZ. So in the US, that's an example of it, even kind of LGBT lobbies, for example, arguing for kind of diametrically opposite things in terms of the letter of the law. One is for lifting, adding more freedom. One is for more state encroachment into the institution of marriage. So I think,
so exactly in the US, right? No one's ever talking about what churches have to do or mosques have to do. This was simply a matter of when you go to the, state of Virginia marriage office to register your marriage, are they going to accept a gay marriage or not? But if I want to have a Sharia marriage contract, even that's between that the mosque is a totally different institution, right? So, and that's not telling me that I have to have a certain belief about marriage. It's just it's removing one of the state's definitions of marriage for its purposes.
Yeah, so I think it was based on that. I think it's a different kettle of fish here in the UK, and that's partly why there was such an uproar with the Birmingham kind of those classes, because you had this teacher who identified as gay. Nobody had a problem with him being a teacher and stuff, but the moment the kind of protests and so forth started was when this program No Outsiders was, the literature of it was kind of released, and it was to quote, the aim was to smash so-called heteronormativity. So I think that goes into another issue where I've got some kind of passionately held rants about the way Muslims approach these things anyway. But that was an example of the Muslims only kind of becoming angry and lashing out when something was imposed on them. They weren't, saying get rid of this gay teacher or anything like that. How it was spun, in the media and stuff. But we have this situation now where you have Muslims in some settings allying with more progressive kind of, or in the UK sense, the more left wing. There's a kind of a burgeoning Muslim left kind of movements in the UK, and they have their place, their arguments and so forth. But in some situations, there's these allies allying with the right wing, and some people who are overtly Islamophobic. Normally, they're like, you Muslims, you're taking over the country, you're terrorists, whatever, but you're all right in this. And then Muslims, we kind of fall into that trap of. But I'm thinking sometimes for the future of Muslim activism and politics, don't you think there has to be Muslims present in all of these even unsavory kind of political viewpoints, because that diversity does exist within Muslims in terms of some people might be more inclined towards conservative values. I don't want to call it that and then kind of make us look at our own deen and everything through another lens, but they might be allying on conservative issues. Some people might be allying on more maybe socialist type of issues in the UK context. And I think that I would only think that's a sign of a healthy community. I think sometimes where you do have a say, you do have some kind of your ideas are there in all the different major kind of parties, not just kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. But the other argument is, the other question is, do you think Muslims can do their own politics, as minorities?
I mean, I think that I think that Muslims should be present in all kind of across the political spectrum, so to speak. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is, do Muslims also request that whoever they're partnering with, respect their beliefs and their issues, right? So it's not about who do you work with. It's about, do you require those people who work with you to take your sensibilities into consideration? So it's, I don't mind if, like, for example, working with like a right-wing group, right? Like, I don't expect them to like my religion. I don't expect them to agree with my religion. But for example, I'm not going to work with them if they're also trying to prohibit immigration of Muslims, or they're trying to like ban Sharia. I don't care what common interests we have. Right? So, they have to kind of, as just a fundamental principle, they have to sort of acknowledge my right to exist in this country. Similarly, if I'm working with like a left wing or progressive group, like Mazen, wati sautik min fadlik? Shukran. So I also expect them to respect my religious beliefs. Like, I'm not going to agree to certain things. I'm not going to approve of certain things. I'm not going to morally, advocate certain things. And if they are not okay with that, then I can't work with them. If they are okay with that, then we can work together. Yeah. So I think it's more about, not, wherever you are in the political spectrum, not seeing your participation as this unilateral, like one side compromises, once, you kind of join in and you accept everything that people say.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, like, and this is a problem with, for example, the Democratic Party. Oh, hang on, my computer's going to die. I got to go plug it in. So you're not to like bear with me as I walk into my office. It's not a matter of, this is a problem with the Democratic Party in the United States, is that it's become so committed to very specific aggressive agenda. So the problem is that the Democratic Party in the U.S. has made it impossible to work within the party's kind of perimeter, right? You can't, if you don't fully morally sign on to a whole kind of progressive agenda, right? But the problem is, and this isn't just about Muslims, right? There's lots of Americans who would vote Democratic, but who don't, for example, don't want their children being taught certain things in school when they're 5 or 6 years old. And they might not even be religious people, right? They just don't want, like, they have certain views about family and society, and they don't think that, radically progressive views should be imposed through schools on children, right? And unless the Democratic Party can accept that view and acknowledge that those people have a right to that view and work with them, they're going to preclude representing and working with a huge chunk of the nation's population, Muslims included, right? So what this is, I mean, one of the things people always get upset about at me for with this LGBT issue, and they're just imagining things, right? Is they say, "Oh, you want drag queens reading stories to kindergartners." It's like, no,
Mm.
I don't. What are you talking about? I mean, first of all, no, I don't think
Mm.
kindergartners or first graders or second graders should be exposed to any of these issues. I don't
Mm.
think they should be told. I don't think they should have to deal with anybody who represents some kind of overtly gender or sexual phenomenon coming into their room, into their classroom, and having to deal with that. I just don't think that's appropriate for children of that age,
Mm.
right? Um, and guess what? I'm not. I mean, I'm Muslim, but there's lots of people who are atheists and Christians and Jewish and agnostic and whatever who
Yeah.
agree with me. And if if a party is not willing to accept that opinion as part of its platform, well, who are they representing? I mean, they're representing a tiny
Mm.
fraction of the country, and they're excluding a massive chunk of the country. So I think you see this happening in American politics constantly, right? Which is, and you mean that the Democratic Party keeps getting trounced in national elections because it's um, basically getting wagged by its kind of radical progressive tail. And that's
Yeah.
not American. The United States is not a radically progressive country.
Do you think
And
that I mean, Joseph Massad, he has a really powerful chapter in Islam and Liberalism about what he calls the Gay International. And I think partly the reason, one of the reasons for what you're explaining, and it's a similar thing here as well, is that the discourse has been um, set already within the kind of in American context, the liberals, and in our context, kind of more left wing discourse. It's been set to vis-a-vis LGBT issues, gender and LGBT issues. It's been set in order to predetermine only two types of characters existing. You have the progressive liberal ally, who's enlightened, who's polite, who is not a racist as well, and you have the bigot. You have the person who he might not be mean or whatever, but he's at least needing of some kind of civilizing, some kind of bringing up to date and stuff. And I think that is because baking that into the discourse is what leads to this totalizing kind of demand, or this muscular liberalism that no, for these things you have to push. We have to have these pushed on people because we don't want them to be this guy. We want them to be this guy, right? And I think that was partly what was fueling the not the confusion, but the word escaped me. The kind of the angst and the annoyance with in the UK context with the compulsory sex and relationship education being coming in 2020 September, and that is Muslims. We didn't have on most of us. I think we don't have the tools in order to articulate our disagreement effectively, right? What we end up doing is jumping into the predetermined dichotomy, the homophobe or progressive ally, liberal ally dichotomy, and even taking rhetoric, taking arguments, taking tools, discursive tools from non-Muslim right wing, from even sometimes racist and Islamophobic people, and in my opinion, it boils down to the treating of the belief that there's something called sexuality, right, as a somatic fact, i.e., as fact to do with the body, like hair color, eye color, size, weight, height, whatever. Because that is being pushed and taken for granted as a somatic fact, whereas even within, queer theory itself, one of its core doctrines is it doesn't exist outside social imagination. It's something created by discourse. It's something created by the social construct, right? But we accept it as given, and then we say, but don't bring it into the classroom, or don't tell my kid about this thing. And I feel that is, we're kind of pulling, we're fighting with one hand behind our back and some weird boxing glove, because that's the thing we end up arguing isn't what we need, what isn't an accurate reflection of our deen, right? Because we don't believe this. I would argue that Islam doesn't believe in there's something called sexuality and it's a somatic fact, and because these are and Joseph Saad mentions this, that it's a cultural effect, kind of universalized by Western imperialism, and it includes the fact that and you know, Foucault, for example, he quotes him, and Foucault mentions himself. You know, he charts the origins of sexuality as a construct and it's a very unique construct to the basically white Victorian England. You know, all the way he talks about the kind of the Christian confessional tradition, this idea of the closet, the epistemology of the closet, right? That there's an internal kind of mystic secret inside of people that is waiting to come out, and when someone comes of age, that comes out, even that phrase coming out, right? So without having some way to discuss these things, Muslims then have to fall on the back foot and either accept you're a kind of homophobe, bigot, or a bigot who's just like a racist, by the way, because, you know, guess what? Race is also, some people might argue, you know, this is a somatic fact and stuff. So, so the Muslims end up arguing. Yep.
So I mean, I think there's two. I agree with you. I mean, I think Massad's discussion of this is really excellent. You know, but I think there's kind of two routes. There's two sort of more sophisticated routes that Muslims and other groups can take in discussing this. One is to say, is to kind of get in the discussion you're talking about, which is, you know, okay, what is? I mean, at the root of a lot of these of the kind of progressive discourse is the idea that there are certain categories that are essentially fungible, right? So, race, sexuality, religion, right? These are all just categories. So these categories have to be respected. So if I'm going to respect your religion, if I'm going to respect your race, right, then we have to respect sexuality as a category. So, you know, not serving a cake to a gay person is the same as not serving a cake to a black person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, and you can kind of discuss that in the language of saying, what is a construct, what isn't a construct. The problem is if you go down the sort of Foucaultian road on this, you end up having to talk about physical gender, physical sex, you know, like biological gender also as a construct, which I don't think it is, and which I don't think Muslims think it is, right? And which I don't think really in the end anybody thinks it is if they really get pushed on it. So clearly, you know, somebody having a penis is not the same as somebody, you know, having blue eyes or brown eyes, and, you know, one of them is irrelevant and one of them is a functional part of someone's reproductive system that is necessary for human beings to reproduce. So I think that the kind of Foucaultian route you're talking about is, I think it's really intellectually interesting. I think it's very difficult to have that discussion in public, in a kind of at a public intellectual or public discourse level. And I think the problem with it is it really, in the end, risks committing participants in that discourse to a complete sort of relativization, flattening of all categories, which I don't think that Muslims actually believe in. The other route one could take, I mean, I'm sure this is not exhaustive, but these are just two that come to my mind, right, is to say, let's not talk about these gender and sex and all this stuff. Let's talk about the role of the state in rearing of children, right? Or the role of the state in employment, right? So is it really the job of the government to come in and decide how my children are going to be taught about their bodies and their minds and their beliefs? Like, I mean, that seems to me to be a totally different issue, right? So we could agree or disagree on any number of things about sexuality, gender, religion, belief, et cetera, and still think that that I as a parent or you as a parent have a greater right to shape your child's understanding of the world than some kind of impersonal leviathan that is going to reach down through the immensely inefficient tentacles of state infrastructure into every corner of our minds without our say, you know? So, I mean, that's like, and if you get in, I think that debate, that argument is actually a much better argument, right?
Yeah.
I think that you're going to have a lot of people who are not religious, a lot of people who are not particularly ideologically on any end of the spectrum saying, yeah, I actually agree with you. I don't think the government should be coming and telling me what my kid should eat, what my kid should drink, and what my kid, you know. So I think that
I think both are necessary, though.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I think the latter is a political strategy, whereas the former is more for in a da'wah or a tarbawi sense for Muslims. Right, because one of the things we focus on in Psalm 21c is not just trying to make Muslims more impactful, but their confidence in their skin as Muslims. And I speak to kind of young people, young Muslims, a little bit now and they don't have the kind of privilege of calling myself a youth worker or anything, but maybe once or twice in a year I speak to some young cool kids, yeah. And I can feel that this is something that just despite the political, you know, the legal and illegal, what does my deen say about this phenomenon, right? And it leads to maybe a lack of confidence in believing that Islam is the best, way of life for anyone, and particularly for them, right? And so I completely agree with you. I completely agree that it seems that for Muslims living as minorities, we want to increase the amount of freedom we have and its corollary, you know, the freedom that people we don't like, they have to say and do, you know, whatever they want within limits, obviously, because it allows us the freedom to, you know, organize our education and our children and all that kind of stuff. But I'm thinking on a level of thinking. Why would Allah, what a young lady once, young sister asked me once, teenager, what's wrong with being gay, right? So even that language, that question, it's taking gayness as an ontology. It's taking gayness as a state of being, right? And without addressing these things, we're going to have a bunch of people who are maybe, you know, Muslim. They agree with the stuff, but somewhere inside they're thinking, but why couldn't it have been a bit different, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, I see your point. I agree with that point. I think one of the things that, you know, I've been trying to write about and advocate is to really like make a Muslim, you know, kind of put forth a Muslim proposal for how we think about, okay, if gender is a construct, like here's our construct. Like I'll tell you. If masculinity is a construct, then here's the Islamic
exactly
version.
Yeah. So I mean, that's why I'm kind of suspicious of all the kind of wholesale rejections of critical theory and even queer theory and gender theory, because if they're taken to their their kind of logical conclusion, and we can say, okay, give us a space at the table as equals, as Muslims. Fine, you want to say there's a million genders, but give us these two, right? Here are two genders.
Yeah, or here's our definition of these two, and so we want to use these definitions for ourselves, and we're going to offer them as models for other people.
Yeah.
And guess what? This is a society where people are starving for understandings of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, because nobody knows what those things mean, right? So, and so that's something I think is really a good opportunity for Muslims, like in terms of da'wah, right? Which is to really say, like, what is a Muslim man? Let me show you what a Muslim man is. What is a Muslim woman? Let me show you what a Muslim woman is. And I think that, like, one of the reasons people become Muslim is, I think a lot of it is because of that question is being answered, and they don't find that answer around them. I think this is just anecdotal for me. I don't have to go some kind of survey for this, but anecdotally, I think this is something that has been really has given a degree of clarity to people who don't have that clarity, don't find that clarity around them.
Yeah. SubhanAllah. I've got a lot of things I want to talk about with you, but I'm conscious of the time. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind meeting again sometime in the not so distant
Yeah, I
future.
don't. Yeah, I wouldn't mind at all. And next time we can pick a time when there's not like some kind of
No
competition for
FIFA
bandwidth at my
tournament.
house. Yeah, FIFA slash kindergarten
Yeah.
art class slash Zoom
Yeah.
call. Um,
But just
yeah,
before I let you go, just wanted to maybe get a few final thoughts of yours in terms of how you would kind of crystallize all the stuff we've been speaking about in terms of maybe a rough strategy for Muslim impact, a positive impact for Muslims on society. So you're in the US context, you're familiar with the UK context, with people from all over the world, listening in. How would you? So you mentioned what did you call the mnemonic you had?
I think it's Rakio. Yeah, I can't
Rakio.
remember what exactly it stands for,
So
but you can find it in the Yaqeen article I
yeah.
wrote. I think it's like rights affirmation, conservative something. I can't
Mm.
remember, but I mean, I would say that like one of the things that Muslims can really do is to really try and elevate discourse in a productive way. So um, we have this tradition of ikhtilaf, which is
Mm.
brilliant, right? So where we can say, for example, me and you disagree on X, and we agree on Y, right?
Yeah.
So and that doesn't, and the fact that we agree on Y means that our disagreement on X is essentially immaterial.
Mm.
Um, we also have this tradition, which is in a lot of ways like tawqifi, and by tawqifi I mean that it doesn't, it's not rational. So the fact that this principle in Sunni Islam that like lawazim al-madhab laysat bi-madhab, right? So the logical entailments of a position are not that position, which is
Mm.
actually irrational, right? So if you say if I say where's God and you do what I say where's in Allah and you point up,
Mm.
so what you're saying is God is over there, which means he's not over there, which means God is in a body, which means God has a body. Okay, what type of body? What is it? Oh my God, you're Mujassim, right? So in theory, like, in theory, I've just uncovered that there's like a huge problem with your
Mm.
theological beliefs. But what Sunni Islam says is we're just gonna say that the entailments of a position cannot be read as entailing that position,
Because it would lead
right?
to
Yeah,
a string of
it's a
lawazim.
disaster. It would lead to
Yeah.
like serial takfir. I call it like James Bond villain rationality. So, James Bond villains are always very rational. They're like, of course, why wouldn't I want to like replace the human race with a better human race? Like, isn't that like I have a vacuum cleaner, I can get a better vacuum cleaner. Isn't that like a good thing? It's like, yes, I guess that's rational, but I mean, so the reason is very dangerous, very
Mm.
dangerous. So in one way, Islamic tradition has this very rational, almost cold tradition of ikhtilaf, where they say, look, we
Mm.
can compartmentalize our disagreement on this thing and on that thing.
Mm.
And so we have sort of fundamentals we agree on, then we start to diverge at a higher level of secondary, then we diverge further on a tertiary level, further on a fourthary level, whatever, quadrary level, right?
Let me Google it.
Um, on the other hand, we have this like very irrational
Mm.
idea that we're actually gonna acknowledge that we have to live with other people and be in community with other people, even though there's things about our beliefs that are actually incompatible at a rational level.
Yeah.
But that our collective commitment to our ummah, our collective commitment to our risala, or our collective commitment to our polity at a state level, right? That this actually enables us to like set aside some of the. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that phone ringing
Oh
and
no, it's fine.
stop it, but so Muslims have this beautiful mixture of kind of rational disagreement and then irrational acceptance of plurality, which I think is just ideal for how to live in like a pluralistic, diverse society
Mm.
like the UK or like the US. I think it's actually like an excellent recipe.
Yeah, I'm always saying that when I'm speaking to kind of non-Muslims, if they're kind of if somebody's being a bit of a harsh interview or something, I'll just kind of turn the tables a bit and saying, Islam has a lot to teach us about how to actually live in a properly pluralistic society, not just something where one standard is forced under the cloak of secularism and universalized for everyone to yield to, you know. But I mean, I'd love to discuss that in some more detail in the future. I don't want to take too much of your time, lest you think I'm not going to
Yeah, I
answer
gotta
this
go
guy's
buy a
calls again.
water filter. Our
Yeah,
water filter like exploded, and
yeah.
now I've been told this problem has to be solved. So
SubhanAllah.
I'm have to don a mask and gloves and go figure out where to buy one of these things.
Yeah. سمعنا وأطعنا. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, it was
Jazakallah
great
khair.
talking to you. We can talk in the future, inshallah,
Yep,
more.
Jazakallah khair for your time. And Jazakallah khair, you guys at home, for watching. If you like this podcast, give it a like and a share. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, then click the old subscribe button and get notified whenever we get this good stuff like this out. So I've been your host, Salman Butt. Thank you very much again, Dr. Professor Jonathan Brown. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.
Unscripted Live.